For more on this national strategy and what it might mean, Jeremy Kronick is my guest, senior policy analyst at the Howe Institute, of course, one of our country's premier think tanks, and he's standing by in Toronto. Good to have you on, Jeremy. Thanks for this.
Thanks for having me.
So your reaction to this Liberal strategy, this national housing strategy, a lot of pomp and circumstance. Break it down for us.
Well, I mean, I think there's some good things. Certainly anything that increases the supply of housing in any way, we think is a good thing. We've argued many times in the past that the issues, especially in our big cities, are supply side, and so anything that gets those housing units built, we think is a good thing, and certainly. Low-income people, and that 1.7 million number is a big number, and we certainly don't think that there should be anybody on the street in a country like Canada. And so there's a lot of good things there. The voucher program, we think, is a good one. It puts money in the hands of people and lets them choose where they want to live and the type of city they want to live in and the type of unit they want to live in. So those are some of the good things, and certainly the government deserves credit for that. But whether or not this is going to actually deal with some of the major issues, the low-income people, what he's talking about, represent about 6% or so of the market. So that leaves a lot of people in that middle class, those people who, have good jobs, but it's, very hard to live in the Torontos and the Vancouvers of the world. And it's unclear that this is going to be nearly enough supply to deal with that. And it certainly doesn't get at some of those supply-side issues that I think are important in expediting approval times for developers, putting infrastructure in places where land has been earmarked for development but can't be built because there's no water, there's no sewage, things of that nature. And so, there's still a lot of things to work on here, and but it does deal with some of the issues. All
right, let's unpack it a little bit if we can. Then the highlights for you in layman's terms. This is sort of your area of expertise, but you can understand that for some people they are not experts on this here. What jumps out for you in the announcement?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing that jumped out was the $40 billion number, because it started off as $11 billion in the budget in March, and we heard that, now it's going to be $40 billion. And so there's a lot of questions that come with that. We heard that a lot of that money actually is coming from the provinces and the territories. So how that's all going to work, I think, is important, because the provinces and the municipalities have to play an important role in some of these issues that I just mentioned: the infrastructure, the approval timelines, all those things that are needed to actually develop, the housing units. Because if they're not on board, all you're doing is putting more money in the system, which is just going to drive up prices. So it'll be very interesting to see how that's all going to work together.
What about the issue of real estate prices as well? Because, you can build more affordable housing units and you can repair some that are falling into disrepair, and yet you still have the issue of the skyrocketing prices in places like Vancouver and Toronto.
Absolutely, and I mean, this gets at some of that, but like I said, I mean, when you're focusing on the affordable housing part of the market, you're not really talking about what units people in that middle class are really looking for, right? The people you hear about the affordability crisis, the detached homes, condos that are really, family friendly, those are not what we're talking about here. So, again, this is important, and we certainly don't think anybody should be living on the street. But if you're talking about more of those fundamental issues that the media has talked about a lot, and we've all talked about a lot in the last few years, this really is not getting at some of those issues.
Right, and every government comes into power saying they are going to fight homelessness. This is obviously on a federal level, but a lot of the money is going to come from the provinces and from the cities. We saw the mayor of Toronto at this announcement, John Tory, as well, as part of all of this, and some local Liberal MPs, including Adam Vaughan. Housing has been a big issue for him. This notion of trying to reduce homelessness by 50%, I mean, that's very ambitious. Is there enough money in that to do that?
I mean, that's a great question. Whether that target is going to be met in 4 years or 5 years or 10 years or 20 years, I mean, we'll have to see. I mean, I think one thing that was a bit disappointing in the announcement was that a lot of the money wasn't going to start funneling out into the system until 2019. And so, those numbers, I think, are a little bit ambitious, but certainly that's the target of this policy, the strategy. I mean, it really is at the low income, the homelessness, and that's a great strategy. It's a noble strategy, but it's a particular part of the industry, and I think we just need to all recognize that that's what it is. It has nothing really to do with kind of that middle income, the Toronto, Vancouver families that can't afford to live in homes or three-bedroom condos that they would like to with their families. It's a very different strategy targeted at a very different sector of the population.
One other thing I want to ask you about is the timeline here, Jeremy, because for folks who are going through this in the here and now, this is great, but this is over 10 years. It's not going to help them next week.
Well, that's exactly it. And then the 2019 discussion after the next election, I mean, what happens if there's a new government in power then? So how do all those things work? I mean, I'm not sure I completely understood the reason why, we can't get this going sooner. I understand that we have to get it right, and I think that that's important. But, after 2019, after a new election and who knows what will happen in terms of which government will be in power, I mean, it does leave a little bit to be desired. And you're right, the problem is now. And so we should be thinking about how we can do things in the shorter term.
Jeremy, great to have you with us as we cover this today. We appreciate your expertise.
Okay, thanks for having me.
Jeremy Kronick with the C.D. Howe Institute.